So it's day 2 of the Superbet Chess Classic. Jan Nepomniachtchi is fresh off the back of the World Chess Championship. He's playing with black in this game, and his opponent is the local lad Bogdan-Daniel Deac, a Romanian-born player and 2700 FIDE rated. So absolutely no slouch. Let's see what happened. So Deac kicks off with pawn d4. We see knight f6, c4, e6, and knight f3 now takes us back into a main line Queen's Gambit declined when Jan goes d5. We see knight c3, and now bishop e7 was followed by bishop f4. You very often see bishop g5 as well. We get castles, pawn e3, and Jan now goes with pawn to c5. Now he loves to play the Tarrasch defense, which is where you commit these pawns like this without even developing the knight or bishop. So he's very familiar with these pawn structures, lots of similar themes. We now see takes on c5, Jan recaptures with the bishop, and a3 is a really standard move, takes control of b4. Who knows if one day you're pushing that pawn as well. We see knight c6 from Jan, and now queen c2, and we see a few of these moves now from white, delaying the development of this bishop here, waiting to see if Jan's going to take on c4, and then you can recapture in one. So Jan now goes with queen to a5, and it looks like you're walking into b4, but this just doesn't work. You can take with the bishop or the knight, and this pawn's actually pinned to the unprotected rook. So what do we see instead? Well, rook d1, again delaying the development of this bishop. And now Jan, he waits for his part. So he goes pawn h6, not doing anything in the center or with the pawn structure, waiting for this bishop to commit. And by the way, this time, if you go pawn b4, well, now the knight can capture, and after pawn takes back, the problem is the pressure on this knight. It's overwhelming with this one coming to e4, better for black. So again, no b4, not possible. We see bishop e2, and now Jan, he goes for this knight e4 idea, and it's actually a pawn sacrifice. So white takes on d5. We see pawn recaptures, and now the rook picks up the pawn. So what's Jan's idea? Giving this pawn, well, now he captures on c3, and here's the really interesting moment in the game, because Deac recaptures in a very bold manner. Now the normal way, there's one game in the chess.com database here, although there could be more in the Lee Chess, I'm not sure, I haven't checked it out, but the normal way of recapturing what Jan expected was pawn takes on c3. And the idea here now for black is that you've smashed up the pawn structure, right? And so you're going to recapture one of those pawns. I mean, this one's literally attacked twice, defended 0 times, and in a moment you'll kick away that rook with either bishop e6, knight e7, and okay, game goes on, should be roughly level. But what we see in the game is queen recaptures, and this walks into a tactic, a brilliant move after just 14 moves here. So can you find it? And I suspect some of you will be able to find this one, right? It's definitely findable. So bishop b4 is the move. You skewer the queen to the king, and if white were to take here, you know, the minute you moved the bishop, well, you opened up the rook to capture the queen, well, then you can take with check, the pawn recaptures, knight takes back, and you picked up an exchange in a slightly more favourable manner. Now in the game, we see pawn captures on b4, allowing the rook to then drop on d5. So again, Nepo has picked up the exchange, but this is a better version for white, because at least now you get pawn b5, you drive the knight back, and you can see this pawn is kind of stymieing these two, and then the bishop pair now give compensation as well, cutting across the board, and they could be really relevant later in the game. So castles was now played, and here Nepo had a choice. He wants to complete his development. He could have gone bishop g4, also a good move. He goes bishop e6. The computer just gives zeros in this position, level. Now this one does walk into knight d4, but then knight f5. Yes, white picks up this bishop. The queen recaptures, but in compensation for giving the bishop, which could have been a powerful piece, opposing this one, well, at least Nepo's got free and easy development. His rooks are coming to the open files, and his knight's looking quite active. And now white plays ambitiously here, because you could play a move like bishop c4 or queen e5. They're two of the top candidate moves, and Nepo looked at those ones himself as good moves, gives it roughly level. But pawn h3 is played, and this is more ambitious, and we'll see why. So Nepo centralises his rook. We get bishop f3, staring at the b pawn. The rook comes to the c file, picks up a tempo on the queen, it jumps out to a5, hits a second pawn, and Nepo now goes b6. Yes, this pawn drops, but this one doesn't because it's supported by the queen. And in the space of 4 moves, yes, white's won a pawn, but the queen is now stranded offside, and although these bishops are powerful, they're kind of firing into thin air right now. In the meantime, Nepo's rooks are centralised, as we can see, and bang, g5 starts this kingside initiative, also supported by his queen and knight. So the bishop, it drops back to h2. If you try bishop c7, attacking here and here, well then you run into rook d7 and you're dropping a piece due to the pins. So it comes back to h2, we see knight h4, pressuring the bishop on f3, it jumps out to b7, and Nepo now invades with the rook. And now Deac plays queen a4, attacking the rook and setting a kind of sneaky trap. So if you take this pawn, well, you've actually just left control of this c7 square. So white can attack the rook and the pawn, and although black can invade, then you go bishop c6. You cut the queen's defense of this pawn, and after the bishop captures, it's spinning round into d4. Plus there's queen a8 check ideas. Now I won't go super deep on the whole line here, it gets quite tactical and complex, but it really gives white counterplay. So instead, Nepo goes rook c4, stays on that c file, and he's also setting up some bishop trap ideas which he mentioned after the game. So if white had gone queen to b3, then he was looking at this rook move, hitting the bishop, and if bishop a8, well then you can actually trap that bishop with rook a7, it's got no retreat squares to go to. But okay, queen b3, not played. We saw queen a6 instead, and now king g7 gets away from some of these check ideas, prepares to bring down the rook. We see pawn b4, again Nepo, he doesn't take the bait of capturing the pawn, and now rook c2 played instead. We had queen a1 check, and f6 is precise. The reason you didn't want to sidestep the king and pushing the pawn is better is because now the bishop can't use the e5 square and again spin into d4. So instead, we see king g1 now played by Deac, and it's basically to fight against a number of the tactical ideas which Nepo had. In some lines, for example, the rook is coming to g1 to defend the pawn because the knight is of course attacking, and if the queen ever lands on this diagonal, threatens a mate, that could be dangerous. You know, bishop c6, rook captures, giving back the exchange, queen comes, things could get dangerous. So it's quite deep, don't want to go too crazy on the lines. Rook d2 from Nepo, pressuring this pawn, and now it's defended with bishop g3, but it's just a bad losing move. And again, just to show you some of the tactics, if you defend with the king, you know, bring it back, well, things get really dangerous after knight to f5. I mean, if you try and get active with the queen, for example, bring it down the board, well then there's this awesome move of rook takes on f2. It looks like that one's defended, but then you check down here, the rook is forced back, check, and this is actually leading to a forced checkmate. Just one sample line of some of the problems that were still ongoing for white, even if you bring the king back. So bishop g3 was tried, covering the pawn, hitting the knight. It hopped into f5, bishop c6 on the board, and look at Deac's time, by the way, he's way down on the clock. Jan doing his classic press. Now rook a2 stops the queen invading to the 7th, giving any kind of check. We see queen b1, and now pawn h5, Nepo doesn't even rush to capture this bishop, he's threatening h4, and so queen e4 now from Deac. He's just desperate to bail out, try and get to an endgame, take away the pressure from his king. And Nepo obliges, the bishop recaptures because he's seen now he can simply smash up the pawns, and this endgame is just hopeless for white. The pawn's a mess, an exchange up, but it's instructive how Nepo does it. So the pawn is attacked, gets defended by the king, g4, pawn h4, bishop c6 now played, opens the rook on the f-pawn, Nepo covers with the king, we see king h2, rook takes on b4, and now white goes rook a1, desperate for counterplay. but rook e2 comes behind this pawn, king g1, rook bb2, check from a7, king f8, check, king here, and here we see resignation. Why? Well, if you play the most natural move in the world, check the king, force it to sidestep, defend your pawn, well, the big problem is your own king is getting hunted. I mean, say you play a waiting move just to leave this one protecting here, well then the rook can slide away and there's a threat to actually deliver checkmate. So if you step back, well then we can see a line like this, check, king h2, the rook's double, and because of this pawn, that's actually a threat of checkmate. You'd have to go g3, then we slide back with check, the bishop has to block, and you can even pick up this rook. But even if you weren't picking up a rook, you know, you could go here, pick up a bishop, so the whole thing is just dead lost. You can't escape these problems, and if the rook comes back to defend here, well then the king slowly marches in and there's too many weaknesses in the white position. So Nepo wins, and these are the standings at the end of day 2. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do pause if you want to check these out, and if you want to see another epic game of chess, then see the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.